What if your worth as a woman was determined not by your mind, not by your heart, but by a thin, fragile membrane inside your body? Imagine being 14, 15 years old, standing in the center of a cold, stone room, surrounded by officials, midwives, royal guards, or worse, your in-laws. Your body is not yours. It was public, legislated, inspected, celebrated, or condemned. In China, they used silk cloth and midwives trained like interrogators. In Europe, they inspected bedsheets for blood and held entire trials for unproven brides. In India, women walked barefoot across fire to prove what could never truly be proven. In Egypt, in the Islamic courts in Edo-Japan, virginity was currency, and women paid the price with their silence, their dignity, sometimes their lives. Behind velvet curtains and golden gates, the most powerful courts in history demanded proof of purity before a woman could become queen, wife, or even concubine. It's a political battlefield, a sacred seal, a test of blood. For thousands of years across continents and empires, the notion of virginity was not a private matter. The rituals were different. But the goal was always the same: control. But what if it was all a lie? What if the idea of virginity as a physical, scientific truth never existed in the first place? Today, we're going to uncover the disturbing truth behind virginity testing in ancient courts. A truth soaked not in romance or honor, but in blood, fear, and power. From emperors to pharaohs, from holy virgins to sacrificial queens, we'll travel across 7 civilizations, exposing the dark obsession that rulers had with a woman's sexual past. And by the time we reach the final story, you'll understand this was never about biology. It was always about control. 1. The Ming Dynasty, the virginity test of imperial concubines deep within the Forbidden City. Beyond the golden halls and jade pillars, there was a chamber not marked by splendor, but by secrecy. It was here that virginity was measured. Under the Ming Dynasty, a woman chosen to enter the emperor's inner palace did not simply become a consort. She became state property. And before she could kneel before the throne, she had to kneel before the midwives. The process was called the 3 examinations, or Tam Deshem. The first was a background inspection. Was her bloodline clean? No trace of criminals, traitors, or rebels. No signs of ancestral shame or ill omen. The second test judged her physical aesthetics. Straight teeth, soft voice, hips wide enough to bear royal children, no flaws, no scars, clear skin. But it was the third test that chilled even the boldest hearts, the inspection of her virginity, known as the test of the closed gate. A panel of 3 female officials, typically older, widowed palace women trained in ancient medical rites, would conduct the ritual. A white silk cloth, immaculate and cold, was laid beneath the girl. She was ordered to lie still, legs apart, eyes closed. A powdered herbal oil was applied to soothe the tension, but everyone knew nothing truly eased what came next. With a narrow stick, thinner than a calligraphy brush and wrapped in clean cotton, the examiner would assess her most private space. They checked for resistance, depth, and dryness. They claimed this revealed purity, but we know now it was theater. A ritual, a myth institutionalized. If the cloth remained white, she passed. If there was blood, it was perfect proof. But what if there was nothing? Some were quietly dismissed, reassigned to menial duties, washing clothes, pouring tea, or sweeping hidden corners of the palace. Others, less fortunate, were labeled impure, accused of seduction, and publicly shamed. Some were even executed. The most haunting part? These girls were often between 13 and 17 years old. Their first contact with the emperor came not with honor or affection, but with inspection. And the ordeal did not end there. After the wedding night, a second ritual awaited, the blood sheet ceremony. A handmaiden would present the stained bedsheet to court eunuchs, who logged it into imperial records as though it were a contract fulfilled. If no blood was found, suspicion brewed. A second inspection could follow. In rare cases, a trial. Historians debate how frequently these practices occurred, but documents like the Ming Palace Archive and Inner Court Protocols confirm their existence. One record describes the case of Lady Song rejected after a failed test and sentenced to scrub latrines for the rest of her life. The irony? Modern science confirms that many women do not bleed during first intercourse, that there is no medical test that can determine virginity. But in the Ming court, it was never about science, it was about power. Power to define a woman's worth. Power to regulate desire. Power to remind every girl that before she could love, she must first bleed. And only in the right place at the right time for the right man. 2. Ancient Rome. Vestal virgins when virginity became a matter of state in the very heart of ancient Rome. Not far from the Colosseum and the Senate halls where emperors once strode, stood a small, unassuming temple. Made of white marble and open to the sky, it housed not statues nor gold, but something far more sacred: fire. A flame that burned without pause, year after year, century after century, not just a symbol, but a soul. The very soul of Rome, and the ones entrusted to keep it alive, were little girls, and held a power no other Roman woman could claim, the ability to pardon condemned criminals with a single touch. In a brutal male-dominated society, Vestals were placed on a pedestal, worshipped, protected, honored. Chosen between the ages of 6 and 10, drawn from noble families, these children were taken from their homes to become Vestal virgins, priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. From that moment forward, they were no longer daughters or sisters, they were sacred. They belonged to the state. For the next 30 years, they would be bound by a single inviolable vow to remain virgins. In return, they were granted rare privileges. Vestals rode in their own chariots, had reserved seats at gladiator games. Instead, Rome maintained a far more effective system: total surveillance. Vestals were always watched. Every gesture, every word, every glance catalogued and judged. They were forbidden from even speaking alone to a man. But their power came with a shadow, but most never did. Decades of isolation and sacred duty had changed them. They had become something neither woman nor God, revered yet alone. The people believed that if a Vestal lost her virginity, the gods would turn their backs, crops would fail, enemies would invade, Rome itself could fall. And that shadow was obsession with purity. She could not be whipped, could not be executed by sword. Her body was considered too sacred to be spilled. So Rome had another punishment: she was buried alive. If a Vestal was even suspected, let alone proven to have broken her vow, the consequences were terrifying. The city would mourn silently and move on, her name erased. Her story never spoken again. Lowered into an underground chamber with a loaf of bread, a flask of water, and a single flickering lamp, she would be sealed away. One of the most chilling examples was Cornelia, a Vestal accused in 90 BCE of a secret affair with a young nobleman. No evidence was ever produced, no confession ever made. But suspicion alone was enough. She walked calmly to her death, head held high, holding the flame she once guarded in her hands. There are no surviving records of the Vestals undergoing physical examinations to prove their virginity. No cloths. No oils, no probes like in other cultures. To the Romans, a Vestal's chastity wasn't just personal, it was political. Virginity here wasn't about sex. It was about stability. It wasn't biology, it was ritualized control. After 30 years, a Vestal was freed. She could marry, live among the people, start a family. In Rome, virginity was elevated to the divine. And those chosen to embody it lived not lives of luxury, but of quiet sacrifice, holy, honored, forgotten. 3. India's Rajput era. Trial by fire. Agnipariksha, she stood barefoot on the dry earth. The air was heavy with incense. Around her, elders chanted Vedic hymns, their voices sharp and solemn. Before her, fire. A wall of it, roaring, rising, crackling like the judgment of the gods. Behind her, silence, suspicion, shame. She was a woman accused. And in the ancient Rajput kingdoms of India, there was only one way to prove her innocence: walk through fire. This was the Agnipariksha, the trial by fire. A test not of knowledge, not of courage, but of chastity. The myth goes back to the Ramayana, one of India's most sacred epics. After rescuing his wife Sita from captivity, Lord Rama did not embrace her. He questioned her purity. To prove her innocence, Sita entered a blazing fire, unburned, protected, the priests claimed, by her virtue. especially under the fiercely patriarchal Rajput dynasties between the 7th and 18th centuries, where honor, not truth, governed a woman's worth. But what began as symbolic mythology evolved into dangerous precedent. A queen returning from capture, a wife suspected of secret longing, a widow accused of betrayal, any of these could prompt an Agnipariksha. In a culture where female purity defined a family's name, accusations, whispers, rumors were enough. The ritual varied by region. In Rajasthan, the woman might be ordered to walk across a bed of glowing coals. In Bundi or Muir, she could be enclosed in a circle of flame and told to remain unscorched for a set time. If she emerged untouched, she was declared pure. If not, her screams were absorbed into the fire. The logic was cruel but elegant. If you are truly chaste, the gods will protect you. But there was no appeal, no science, just fire. Historical texts like the Prithviraj Raso and regional bardic chronicles mention these trials, though often cloaked in divine justification, treated as sacrificial offerings to uphold the facade of dynastic honor. But modern scholars like Ramla Thapar and Arnath agree, behind the myth, many real women burned, some voluntarily pressured by centuries of storytelling, others forced, stripped of choice. The cruelty didn't stop with heat. Sometimes the test was symbolic, drinking boiling water, holding a red-hot iron rod, or placing one's hand over a sacred flame while reciting a vow. These two could scar for life. Yet society applauded. A woman who passed the trial was lauded as a sati, a term meaning virtuous woman. But the term became dangerously twisted. Not only was surviving the fire praised, dying in it was sanctified. This conflation led to the infamous practice of sati, where widows threw themselves onto their husbands' funeral pyres. It was no longer about proving virginity. It became about erasing womanhood the moment her man was gone. Agnipariksha was never about the gods. It was about control, ritualized, legitimized, brutal. It placed impossible weight on women's bodies, emotions, and memories, and in the end, even survival came at a cost. Because whether burned or spared, the message was always the same: you are innocent only if you suffer. You are worthy only if you bleed or burn for someone else. 4. Japan during the Edo period. The daimyo's wife and the final virginity trial. During the Edo period, a golden age of feudal Japan that lasted from the 17th to the mid-19th century, samurai lords ruled not only with sword and law, but with control over the purity of the most powerful women within their castles. She was a symbol of purity, of lineage, and of family honor. Any suspicion regarding her virginity could spell disaster. The lord's wife, known as the Ooku, was not merely a political partner. To guard that honor and reinforce their power, the ritual known as mankishi was born, a unique and severe form of virginity, test reserved for women entering the inner circles of power. Unlike other cultures where virginity tests involve physical inspection or trial by ordeal, the mankishi focused on evaluating the physiological and psychological composure of the woman. In Edo society, where honor equaled life, virginity and fertility were survival tools for power, for protection, for the future of an entire clan. During the trial period, palace nurses and female attendants observed her every movement, her interactions, her skin, her expressions, searching for clues. But this was not merely about chastity. It was a test of fertility and potential motherhood. The daimyo needed to be assured that his wife could produce an heir. Any signs of illness, reproductive weakness, or emotional instability were carefully documented. These findings directly influenced her future within the palace. To fail the mankishi meant more than shame. It could result in expulsion from the inner court, loss of title, or even confinement in secret quarters. It demanded physical proof, emotional steadiness, and behavioral perfection, an impossibly high standard imposed upon women of noble blood. What is truly remarkable is that, while many cultures viewed virginity through a purely biological lens, the Edo-era mankishi combined both body and mind. The story of the mankishi is not just about virginity. It is a symbol of control, of obedience, of the sacrifices women were forced to make under feudal systems when their bodies, their emotions, and even their silence were seen as tools to protect a family's legacy. 5. Medieval Europe, the royal bride and the blood on the sheet. Amid the grand castles and ornate chambers of medieval Europe, there existed a ritual so powerful it could determine the fate of entire dynasties: blood on the sheet. The wedding of a princess or noblewoman was never just a personal affair. It was a political spectacle, a battleground of alliances, treaties, and power consolidation. But behind the music, the feasts, and the solemn vows, there lurked a chilling expectation. The bride must bleed. After the consummation, that sheet was inspected not by the lovers, but by male courtiers or trusted family advisors. On the wedding night, a white bedsheet was laid with solemn precision. A single red stain was seen as undeniable proof of virginity, a symbol of honor, virtue, and legitimacy. If the sheet remained clean, suspicion followed like a shadow, and the consequences could be devastating. A bride who failed to produce this proof could face public humiliation, bring disgrace upon her lineage, or become a pawn in rival political factions. In extreme cases, accusations of impurity led to divorce, imprisonment, or even execution. This practice was not confined to one kingdom. It was embedded across European aristocracy, woven into the fabric of royal protocols. It reflected a society obsessed with bloodlines, inheritance, and the illusion of purity. And yet, medicine in those centuries was rudimentary. We now know that many women do not bleed during first intercourse, and that the presence or absence of blood is not a reliable indicator of virginity. But science had no voice in royal courts. So many brides, terrified, desperate, turned to folklore and trickery. Some used herbal tinctures to simulate bleeding. Others went further, smuggling animal blood onto their sheets. If caught, the punishment was often worse than the original accusation. Beyond the blood, physical examinations were also common. The bride's body was scrutinized by midwives or palace matrons to assess her fertility, a vital asset in dynastic politics. Any sign of illness or perceived weakness could result in her being banished from court or locked away in secluded chambers. One infamous case is that of Princess Isabella of France, who married King Edward II of England. Her virginity and ability to conceive were subject to vicious rumors, which escalated into political scandal. Whispers about her purity sowed distrust between royal families and contributed to unrest that reshaped English history. These tales are more than personal tragedies. They are windows into a brutal system, where a woman's worth was measured not by her intellect or character, but by a bloodstain on cloth, a token, a contract, a weapon. In such a world, royal women were not queens in their own right. They were chess pieces moved, sacrificed, or locked away according to the cold logic of blood, marriage, and power. Today, the phrase "blood on the sheet" remains a haunting relic of a time when a woman's body was public property, and her future was decided between her thighs. It reminds us how far we have come and how far we still must go. Because the ghosts of these rituals still echo in societies where female purity is weaponized, where myths are disguised as morality, and where honor still weighs more than freedom. Let us not forget, virginity is not proof, and blood is not truth. 6. Medieval Islamic and Arab regions. The premarital vaginal inspection in the medieval Islamic world and across Arab regions, where law, faith, and social custom intertwined with near total authority, a woman's virginity was not merely a private matter, it was a legal status, a moral certificate, and in many cases a requirement for contractual marriage. The bride was not only expected to be chaste, she was expected to prove it. This proof often came in the form of a premarital vaginal inspection, carried out by midwives, traditional healers, or older women appointed by the groom's family. Sometimes this occurred before the marriage contract was finalized. Other times it was done in secret after suspicions arose on the wedding night. The purpose was simple but brutal: to confirm whether the hymen was intact, a biological myth that had, by then, become law and morality combined. In some regions, oils were applied to soften the skin, but consent was rarely sought. A woman would be asked to lie down, legs apart, as an elder or midwife examined her vaginal opening using fingers, herbs, or cloth. It was not medicine. It was ritual, surveillance, and social control. In wealthier households or noble lineages, the inspection was often formalized. Some even involved local judges or religious scholars who would receive a signed attestation declaring the bride untainted. The certificate could be shown to court in cases of dispute. And if the girl failed the inspection, she risked rejection, divorce, or worse, being labeled as dishonorable, unclean, or even violated property. Some were sent back to their families in shame. Others were forcibly kept as concubines or slaves if the marriage was annulled. Yet what is often overlooked is this: the Quran itself does not mandate hymen inspection, nor does it prescribe such practices. These rituals stemmed from cultural traditions mixed with tribal honor codes, especially in areas where family honor was tied directly to a woman's sexual status. And still, the fear of staining the family name led many to fake the proof. Girls used pomegranate seeds, crushed beetroot, even animal blood smeared secretly on cloth to simulate the red sign. It was deception born from desperation, not deceit. Some scholars of the era did speak out, warning that a torn hymen proves nothing, and that true virtue lies in conduct, not membranes. But those voices were drowned by the louder chorus of tradition and fear. Today, these medieval practices live on in some regions under different names. Two-finger tests, honor certificates, and post-wedding virginity validations still haunt modern societies. They are not health checks. They are tools of control, a legacy of a time when women's dignity was collateral and their bodies were battlegrounds for honor, family, and faith. Let us say it clearly, with the voice history never gave them: virginity is not a wound to examine. It is a myth used to cage. Virginity, science or social construct? Virginity, a concept that has existed for thousands of years across cultures and societies. But does it truly exist in the way we imagine under the lens of modern science? To begin with, the hymen, long regarded as the proof of virginity, is not a reliable indicator. The hymen is a thin, delicate membrane that can tear for many reasons unrelated to sexual intercourse, intense physical activity, sports injuries, accidents, medical procedures, or even the use of tampons. Even when torn, it does not always result in bleeding. This makes so-called virginity tests, whether checking for hymenal integrity or virgin blood, highly inaccurate and scientifically invalid. Leading medical organizations such as the World Health Organization and the Guttmacher Institute have strongly condemned virginity testing, labeling it a violation of human rights that causes severe psychological trauma for women and has no clinical or diagnostic value. More importantly, modern experts in medicine and sociology now emphasize one vital truth: virginity is a social construct. It is not a biological state. It is a cultural idea created and imposed by societies to control female bodies and behavior. Across history, the concept of virginity has been weaponized to define honor, to enforce morality, and to police gender roles. But today we know better. A woman's worth cannot and should not be measured by a membrane or a bloodstain. To move toward a more just and respectful society, it is essential to recognize this truth: virginity is not a marker of purity or dignity. And virginity testing must be abolished entirely as an outdated, oppressive practice with no place in modern science or ethics. From the imperial courts of ancient China to the sacred chambers of Roman palaces, from the silent tombs of Egypt to the opulent castles of medieval Paris, one bitter truth echoes across centuries: women were not autonomous subjects. They were objects inspected, measured, and judged through the lens of virginity rituals designed not to protect but to control. These tests, regardless of their form, were never truly about safeguarding sexual morality. They were about guarding family honor, preserving pure bloodlines, and above all, enforcing political power. Behind every public declaration, behind every blood-stained sheet, lay a vast social machina system built to legitimize inequality, to encode dominance into the very fabric of cultural norms, to weaponize biology in service of hierarchy. And here lies the most haunting question of all. If every woman is to be tested, then who tests the men? This is not just a rhetorical question. It is a moral reckoning, a stark reminder of the double standards and gendered bias that have shaped social ethics for millennia. Virginity is not medical truth. It is not an intrinsic moral value. It is a Tula political construct forged and refined over thousands of years to discipline, manipulate, and subjugate. Understanding this is the first step toward breaking the cycle, toward building a world where a human being's worth is not measured by a fragile membrane or a patriarchal myth. And you watching this, reading this, must ask yourself, is it time we said no to rituals that claim our bodies, invade our privacy, and silence our freedom? Is society brave enough to question the systems that still hold women and men to unequal standards? Virginity is not truth. It is power, disguised as tradition. And only through awareness, courage, and collective can we begin to rewrite that story.